Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Fulbright Pulse podcast. This season will be powered by Fulbrighter, the exclusive networking platform for Fulbright alumni and grantees. The platform lets you keep up to date with news from the global community of Fulbrighters and connect with fellow alumni and grantees from around the world. If you are a current grantee or an alumni from an official Fulbright program, head to fulbrighternetwork.com to create your account. My name is Gabriele Jimenez, and I am a journalist and the community manager for the Fulbrighter platform. Today, I will have a conversation with José Ferraz-Caetano, a Portuguese chemist, historian, and philosopher of science. José is also a Fulbright scholar with the University of California and a researcher at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Portugal. José works with data science for computational chemistry, developing artificial intelligence methods towards chemical property and reaction predictions. He also collaborates as a visiting researcher at the Institute of Contemporary History in Portugal. José regularly writes about science communication and public understanding of science, and is an assistant editor of the Fulbright Chronicles, a peer-reviewed periodical featuring the work of Fulbright scholars. Today, we will discuss the future implications of artificial intelligence in our daily lives and other AI-related topics. Welcome, José. It is a pleasure to have you on the Pulse podcast.
Hi, Gabriele. Nice to meet you, and thank you for having me.
Amazing. We're very happy to have you. So I'm just going to dive in because AI, I think, is the topic everyone's talking about. But before, I just quickly wanted you to tell me a little bit about how you got into science and chemistry. Was this something that was a calling or something that you discovered, organically? So tell me a little bit about that, your history with science.
Well, I do. I was never like one of those really dreams as a kid. I want to be a chemist, want to be a scientist or a rocket scientist or something like that. Never had that type of calling, but I was always very curious. There was eventually all science classes I had, mostly in high school, that especially chemistry, where I was reminded all about these laws and physics and how things come together and other things that was also intertwined. And it got me interesting. Okay, maybe I would like to have some type of connection with this and like to have to do some contribution. I considered going to med school, but unfortunately it was not something that I was very comfortable with. And then when I was in my high school, I figured, okay, what would be something that would give me for something to strength about giving back to the community, something that I could be really good on. And I thought science would be a good subject. And chemistry was basically my first choice because I was always had more prone to chemistry. How about laws, chemistry, physics were intertwined, and it was an easy step for me. But then eventually, as I went to do the chemistry course, I figured that chemistry was not going to be everything that's going to be make me happy in terms of research-wise. So that's when I started delving into philosophy of science, then history of chemistry, and started asking some questions that I was lingering about when I was engaged in my chemistry degree. And that led me to finishing my bachelor's and then master's in chemistry. And I was so intertwined with the idea of how chemistry involved, what are the questions that it can make now in the future. And I was very, very interested in how sometimes history of chemistry could give some answers to the challenges that we are facing nowadays. So that's when I eventually started to do a little bit of history. I then started with the master's also in contemporary history. And then I started with my PhD in sustainable chemistry. And during that time, I also, of course, doing AI modeling for chemistry property predictions. And at the same time, I also conducting research in history philosophy of science. And most of them are related also to computational methods to study undergoing social movements and how we can also predict some movements that we have on disinformation, misinformation, fake science, and so on. And it was a very good opportunity to delve between all about of history, but also chemistry. And I know it's not an obvious path, but it was something that was made clear as I was understanding more how chemistry was evolving around me.
That sounds really interesting, and I definitely want to hear more about how you connected the two kind of sides of your educational path. But I also want to know a little bit about your Fulbright journey. So, how did you first hear about Fulbright? Was this something that you always knew about, or did a friend tell you about it? And maybe tell us a little bit in a nutshell about your experience as well as a Fulbright scholar.
Well, I was recognized, of course, the name Fulbright. It was very, very visible from when I started my university path, which was already a comprehensive exchange program. But my first hands-on experience was actually a friend who also was also a PhD student in biology, but she went to Columbia in New York and also with a Fulbright. And she just went, I think, for just 4 months, and she told me how her vision on how to do science completely changed for a good way. It was so much different from what she was expecting to do here in Portugal. And then how she saw that although they are studying the same questions, they were envisioning them from a different angle. And that was something that when she was talking about that to me, was very, very enriching. I thought, okay, I would really love somehow to have this experience once. And in my case, I got engaged a little bit with, as a, not a coincidence, but also our English, because when I was starting doing my project in history and philosophy of science, I was reading a fantastic book by then what would become my supervisor Fulbright program. She's Professor Kelly O'Connor. She wrote this beautiful book about misinformation age. It was a book in mid 2010s, 2016 or something. And she was the first person that wrote something that I could understand, that how could you apply computational methods to study social movements, disinformation. And it had this very beautiful trade book explained like so beautifully, so easily. And I figured, damn, I love just to interact with this person, because it was something that I would never get the possibility to interconnect here. And essentially, I just wrote an email to her and I said to her, oh, I'm presenting myself. I would like to do this project and using some of the tools you discuss. And I sent an email and I didn't get an answer for some days, which I was kind of thinking, okay, maybe this is not going well. But eventually heard back from her and we started talking. We did Zoom calls and ideas were starting bubbling. She was very welcoming. And then she said, okay, maybe it's time that you come here and then we work on something. And I said, okay, it would be great, but it's not very easy thing to do when you're a PhD student over the way overseas. And she actually was the one that said, why don't you apply for a Fulbright? Why don't you like take a chance and do that? Because she was really felt that that I was really into this project and was something that she also believed it would be something interesting. And that's what I read about the Portuguese Commission of Portugal here in the Fulbright community, and started reading how to apply, all the things I needed to do. I got my letters from then would be my host and the University of California, and then just wrote a beautifully neat research project, and eventually got an interview for the Fulbright program. And then in the academic year of 21-22, I was accepted, and then started my tenure there in January 22.
That sounds great. And actually, that is a good opportunity to shout out to all of the Fulbrighters who are listening to us that you could be the person to tell somebody about a Fulbright award that is going to change their lives, as your colleague did tell you about it. So that's another reminder to everybody out there to talk about Fulbright opportunities, and bring other people into the Fulbright program as well. Um, all right, so let's dive into the big AI questions that I think, there's a lot of things that I want to ask you. And one of the big questions I think about AI that's on everyone's minds, and one of the most pressing things is what will happen to the job market, right? From your research, from the things that, your relationship with artificial intelligence, what do you think we can expect in terms of changes? And how long do you think it will take for us to really feel AI's impact on the job market specifically?
Okay, that's actually a very interesting question that I get sometimes asked in my research field because there is not an easy answer saying that we can predict how much it will impact, because just to give you an idea, when I started the PhD was in chemistry, was like in 2020, 2021. And AI was still there, was already there. It was ongoing topic, very interesting topic, but it was like a bit of a nutshell topic, reviewing sciences, and then it just exploded. And what the things that I can do now with AI for my projects are something that when I wrote my research project, I thought, wow, I can't possibly do this in 4 years. But when I got like in my second or third year, started exploring how new tools became available, I then started to see many, many different possibilities, which means that what I thought in 2020 that I would be able to do in 2025 when I'm going to finish, now I know that I can do that and just even so much more that I couldn't figure out to able to be doing that in 2020. So in my field, we say that it's going to create a lot of challenges, but a lot of opportunities. In our sense, for example, just to give you an example how this can be materialized, in my PhD, I had to build a very extensive database of chemical reactions. Essentially, my work was reading research papers and then just annotating all the different variables, what chemicals were used, quantities and temperatures, conditions, whatever. Because, of course, when someone publishes a new article, they wrote in their own ways, they put their tables, so you need to collect all this data. And of course, it's not easy. You have to skim down, like in my research, almost 100, 200 different papers. And with something very, very difficult to do, because when I finished my first year, I was still doing the database. I figured, damn, I'm not going to get this done. It's so difficult. But then I found out that not only nowadays with an AI tool, you can basically upload your papers and write up just a little bit of directive and say, hey, please in these papers skim down the information and retrieve this, and this. Of course, it can't do that to perfection, but if you have some more simple task, for example, analyzing a bunch of documents that you want to create some kind of correlation between them, you virtually can do that instantly. And of course, it will impact the people that need to do these hand working jobs, that you need to be on hands-on doing this part. That, of course, will be something, at least in my perspective, that will become not obsolete, but will be diminishing the hardships of the level of people that you need that. But at the same time, I think about all the different possibilities that we gave us. Because imagine, there is not a lot about, in chemistry, for example, not in computation, but for example, organic chemists and inorganic chemists, those ones that are actually in the bench doing experiments. They do a lot of trial and error. They do a lot of experimenting, say, oh, I'm probably will do an experiment of 5 hours that led into nothing. Because, we have to train and see what gets fixed out. But AI, actually, if you have a substantial database of what you did in the past, and you can actually use data science to skim down all the possibilities that you had in the past, potentially you can save a lot of time just predicting what are the perfect conditions that you have to need in your next one research project that you want to do. There can be a whole lot of possibilities that you need to make about all the data that you have, and the people that were actually doing the difficult job of skimming down information, putting papers and something, now they will be transferred to doing other types of tasks that will be using all this type of data. In a nutshell, I would say that it will, of course, damage some jobs that we actually know about. But at this far, I cannot say how many jobs it will create, because there are so many, just in my field, I see so many possibilities of new tasks that are not being done right now that could be done, that I see that is going to be very, very different transformation. I believe so in other areas that are more dependent on writing, texting, and something that will actually even have a more impact. But if I would have to give you an advice on how to cope with this, I would say that it was a little bit about being challenged for the opportunity. See that If you feel like you're going to be challenged in your own task, maybe we'll open up probably two or different three more tasks that you all can engage on. It's not going to be easy process for everyone, of course not, but it will be something that, for the better or for worse, is going to be here, and it's going to be inevitable in our lives in some way.
I agree. It's undeniable that it's going to change. And I think it's, like you say, it's really unpredictable at this point, except that we know it's coming, right? So, one of the things I did want to ask you about, Azelle, is like, what do you think are the areas where AI is the most promising in terms of improving human lives, right? Because I know it can be promising in so many fields, but I want to know how you feel this can have a positive impact for humans living in this planet right now. What do you think are the most promising research areas that you see?
Well, I would say I'm a little bit biased to say this because I'm a scientist, but I believe that probably the most two important areas for me would be healthcare and the social. I would say normally social research, or at least endeavoring to how to deal socially in terms of big data. For example, in healthcare, imagine that we are used to do a whole bunch of testing, imaging, and blood tests and so on. We deal with a lot of thresholds, numbers, and it's amazing how some diagnoses are purely based on just a doctor seeing into an X-ray or seeing into a file with some analysis maintained for a patient. Imagine that if you can concentrate all the information of previous cases, for example, on cancer metastasis, or it's barely hidden on an X-ray or an MRI or something, that it's so thin that the doctor might just be oblivious to him because he cannot see it. Imagine having some database of all past occurrences, either bad or worse. They can decide with not 100%, but probably with 95 or 99% accuracy, there will be this amount of percentage of possibility to have this or this condition or this other condition. I believe that the power of AI, machine learning, these other tools comes from the amount of data that we harness. And I believe that healthcare is just possibly one of those areas that produces immensely the amounts of data, and will obviously help the doctors that will need to task with different conditions and to different challenges, because it will be so much easier for them. Imagine, for example, here in Portugal, most of the common healthcare provided are by family doctors, because they need to know routine checks, and because since our population is very elderly, they'll take a lot of medicine, they do a lot of imaging stuff. And since we have sometimes discussing a shortage of doctors and not having possibility to have that much people to address those situations, imagine that one person can do with all this other information that can release these other doctors to do more important stuff, instead of being just populating with bureaucracy stuff that they have to deal with this. So basically, we were going to free up all these practitioners of relinquishing all this part that needs to be done, but can be automatically done with a high degree of uncertainty, and then can we release them to do all other things that people are more necessary. For example, taking care of our elderly people, addressing more if you need to be on call for other types of services. That would be something that I believe, if done properly, would be very much beneficial, especially for countries that have limited resources, for example, as mine is Portugal. The other one I would say would be in social sciences, and will be a little bit can be controversial, but for me it's very interesting. It's very difficult to analyze social movements and how to make decisions on policy and how to guide us. It's very difficult because even nowadays it's something that we don't have a blueprint to make some kind of big decisions. And as I was said, we have now a whole bunch of data of things that happened in the past, of things we tested, things that were done, and some of them didn't work. Imagine that if you can make a new decision, making an informed decision of things that you've done in the past, and then attribute a percentage of success for your new task, given the things you learned from the past. That is possible with AI, not in the sense that you can just now write to ChatGPT and give you a perfect answer. It's an ongoing process. But as I've seen the amount of information capability the AI just gained in the last 2 or 3 years, it may be something that will be changing not only our mundane choices, but also drive key political changes and science-driven policies. I think it's some very, very, not only very powerful tool, but also a very decisive one in how we can use it and how we tell people the best way to use it. It's going to be, I won't go as far as saying big revolutionary tool, but it would somehow something that will impact a lot of our every decision that we make, and even the smallest to the big decisions that we can make.
I think that sounds very positive and, very hopeful. But I also want to address concerns that people have, right? So, one of the questions that I have for you is, what do you think are the areas in which we need to be concerned when it comes to AI? For instance, I find it particularly scary when I hear scientists talking about things like the PDUM score, right? Which is basically how high they rate the possibility of AI ending humanity, right? So for me, it's quite alarming to see something like that being discussed so casually. So, as a philosopher of science, as a researcher, what do you make of it?
Well, it's interesting saying that I'm a little bit optimist, because I think I am, because I'm a scientist and I tend to see the most beneficial part of new tools that we are making. But at the same time, as you actually put it, there is something that we need to be concerned about, not about how the tool exists because it is here, but how we use it. For example, I wrote an article like 2 years ago arguing that, can AI purely explain things like we can do as a scientist or a person? Can it have some type of discernment to can have these type of capabilities? I argue essentially that AI can have the possibility to do that because it's bound by human-made rules that makes those reflections and give us the output that we do. But at the same time, we need to take in account that AI is going to be as much as powerful as we let it to be. For example, if we want a model just to specifically do very, very specific task, like aiding you in the best choice of recipe for making a cake, for example, it will have a very, very direct directive to say, okay, this is what I want to know. This is when I give you an output. But the biggest concern is that, imagine that when you ask just this simple question, imagine an AI model gonna drink all the bunch of information that is not related to baking, but you also will absorb that type of data. And I think the biggest challenge is, I think and I believe that a lot of people are already concerned about this, is about data protection. Because AI models by themselves, without data, they're pretty much useless. They are very good predicting tools, but without data, there is nothing they can do. And we need to be a little bit conscious about how we handle the questions that we need to answer with sensitive data. For example, I was talking about the part of healthcare. Of course, if you wanted to use anonymous healthcare digitized experiments of results, you can do that without relinquishing patient's ID or information, because it's for the computer, it doesn't need to know that type of information to make an accurate prediction. On the other hand, if you are a little bit careless on inputting that type of information, for the AI it might not be interesting, but for some other person that is using the AI, it can eventually be very valuable to other types of means. So I would say that if you every day we are now prompted by our phones and say about things about that you want to save your data or something. Nowadays, I believe that if you want to do some type of education or a little bit about information about people of AI is changing, I think the most important thing to do is about their own data protection, about how do you can easily relinquish your type of information. Because, for example, it's very good thing to have digitized tools that you can, for example, interact with the state to get your paper or something. But at the same time, if you started to digitize everything, potentially you can have a big database with a lot of auto information that for a specific count that might not be needed, but it's there and somehow can be fed and making some type of decisions that you don't want it to make or based on other types of things. But as far as your question saying that can, for example, an AI started to be, I won't say autonomous, but starting thinking about stuff that was not supposed to do, I think as we as researchers, as developers, we have more of a responsibility to listen to the people and say what their concerns are. Because if we are, I actually in this part as a scientist, when I try to develop my models, my goal is always to what I can build some type of tool that can explain the things that I want to try to explain in my research project. It needs to have some type of grounded visibility that I can explain to some people. And we know that in this world, there are people that are not going to driven by that modus operandi. They just want results and they don't care how they get there. So I think this somehow, I truly believe there's this soft power of influential stuff that you can do to persons that back on decisions, people that are making research. They can raise awareness to this, as into you can keep control of your data and keeping these things under control. But of course, you put it lightly that I'm a little bit of positivist in this way, but it's something that we should be taking care of and be very mindful when using these type of tools, and something that we really need to have our voices heard and our opinions on this, and not have someone making all the decisions on how to regulate this part.
So do you have a PDOM score that you want to share? What's your PDOM score?
No, I actually don't have, but it's something that I would be interesting to do. I mean, there is, I don't know what movie it was that it said that sometimes ignorance is a bliss. And there are some things that I really do want to know, some things that I really like to have to left a chance or something. But it's something that I really try to do, because I think having that type of thought can make us be a lot more human. Because if we're talking about too much about machines, computers, predictions, probabilities, somehow when you delve too much into this, you can feel like, okay, but where is the chance in all of this? Where is the arbitrary part of all of this? And I think as a philosopher, I tend to try to bring this a little bit into my science practice a bit.
I just think for me, I thought it was very interesting to see this discussion become sort of a hype, right? In the Silicon Valley world, everybody have their PDOM, and it dawned on me that, wow, like this is something really serious that we're discussing casually nowadays, right? Um, but I'm glad you don't have yours. I think that's a good thing not to have. I wanted to ask you as well about something else that is concerning a lot of people when it comes to AI, which is the discussion about its environmental impact, right? So the data centers need a lot of energy, they consume large amounts of water. So do you have any tips or any suggestions when it comes to how we should be using AI in a more sustainable way on our daily tasks? So I'm not talking here about researchers or people who need largest amount of data, but people who use it on a daily basis. Like, is there anything that we can do to make sure that our use is more sustainable in a way?
Actually, this is very interesting, because I don't know if this is true or not, but I read it in some article that asking a question to ChatGPT, like it's consumes like 3 or 4 times more energy than doing the same search on Google, for example. And it probably is true, because we don't really, I can't even put it to a scale on how much hardware you need to have just to have a model to ask, or just so that you can ask a simple question to ChatGPT. It's something incommensurably big. And even when I started doing AI, I didn't have that much of notion how big it is. But as in any other technology, I would say that we need to be reasonable in how we use technology. Of course, it's going to be easy enough if we have very big question we don't get answer, like who was that actor's name on that type of movie, and then just can type on ChatGPT. It will be much easier. But at the same time that we are very conscious about using other types of things. For example, if I live nearby a grocery store, I can go by car, but it's just a 5 minute walk. I am not going to use my car to just for 5 minutes. I'm mindful of that. If we can bring that some type of common sense into how we're using this type of technology, we will be not only addressing those types of concerns, environmental concerns, but also how we are pretty much aware of the technology around us. Because although it's very important that we need to address how energy is consumed and how we can generate enough energy for all the things, technological stuff that we are using right now, if you think about just how much you depend on technology to make your basic life decisions, if you make that a simple assessment, maybe you'll be a little bit too scared about what is my intervention in all this. Because it's really interesting that I never, for example, I really love libraries. I love the fact that in some not only distant past, if you wanted this very specific information, you had to get that specific book in that specific library that wasn't available anywhere else, and you had to specifically go there. Nowadays, you just pop up your phone, ask the question, probably you get your answer. Sometimes we need to take a little bit of a distance how we can make this leap about knowledge being trapped inside of a book located in some area to be accessed on demand with our hands. If we think how powerful this transition was to have this type of knowledge so easily accessed to us, it really makes us think that, wow, this was such a big of advancement. There needs to be some kind of trade-off. And of course it was a trade-off. It's science evolving, it's things going forward, it's industrializing, it's a big movement. Of course it is. But it carries out a lot of issues, not only environmental issues, but also how we deal with these new innovations. The same as when the Industrial Revolution started and all societies shifted around this new movement of industrialized labor and things that they do not exist in, and people really had to adapt to it. I think if we really have the scale how much this is, maybe a little bit too mindful about how we can use this responsibly. And this is a key thing that we also need to address even lower, higher levels of education. Because if you really, of course, I totally understand if teachers are concerned that students are just going to copy paste things they got it in an essay written by ChatGPT. I totally understand that. But I think that the most important thing is that how can you use this tool effectively in a way that is going to give you even more tools to thrive, just depending on your own skills and developing your own skills. And I think that is something very valuable that you could easily introduce. And you also can address not only the societal type of issues, but of course the environmental part, which is very important.
Well, that brings me to another thing that has been very much in discussion lately, which is AGI, right? Artificial General Intelligence, which is, as I understand, the term for when AI models will become as capable as a very intelligent human being, right? And will be able to do basically almost anything or anything a human would be able to do. So I think AI developers have been using this term to define, a breaking point in this technology, right? So the point where that will completely reshape human lives beyond our wildest imagination. So my question is, when do you think you'll get there? Because I've been seeing a lot of predictions. People are talking about 2 years, and others are talking about 5, and others are talking about 10 or 20. So for you, when you think we'll reach AGI, and what do you think about reaching AGI? What does that mean to you as a scientist and philosopher?
Well, as Thomas giving you a prediction, as far as I would love to give you a number, I really don't know, simply because this is, I mean, sometimes I just getting from alerts from new articles or things that I thought of that would only be possible in 2 or 3 years, and someone already published something about it. and it's evolving at such a fast pace that I can't really give you a number. But I would say if this continues as how this is developing in the last 3 or 4 years, I would say that what we have seen in the last 4 years, maybe we will get that much more in the next 4 years to come. So I would say major breakthroughs will be not only our tools in the next 2 to 4 years, probably will have some much more impact than it is. Of course, they will not be probably not the big hype of something that we already thought of, but probably in things that we're not even seeing that can be very much impactful. As far as general and generative AI, I would say that as a scientist, I really pretty much welcome the sight of having a companion to do science. For example, in my PhD, I had to build a model that could generate new molecular structures. Essentially, instead of trying out different molecules to do a specific task, which you had to go to the lab and test each one by one, which of course will take a very much amount of time. In my PhD, essentially, I thought, well, I want a molecule that needs to have this, and this type of characteristics. So why don't I build a model that can generate a molecule that already has this type of characteristics? And when I wrote this proposal in 2021, I thought about this. Can this really be possible? Can I really do something like this? Because the technology was there, but the data was not there. And to articulate this between data and model was, of course, basically what I needed to develop in my 4 years of PhD. And to my surprise, I struggled a lot on doing this for some 2 years and doing this model. And there was just one time where with help with another professor that I had collaborating with me, it just clicked something that, okay, I really can know how to make a logical dialogue with this model to say, okay, you have to look about this type of characteristics. So you need to learn from all those molecules and then write me new ones. And when I did the first trial of this, it generated roughly about 200 different molecules that most of them were not, or they didn't even exist in any database, and some of them already existed. And my project, of course, in the midst of science is, of course, a very, very tiny part. But imagine if, for example, it takes so much time in developing some type of drugs for some type of thing that we know. We know what the target we need to tackle, but we don't have the knowledge about giving that specific molecule for that. What about if we can have a model, a generic or generative AI model that can do this for us? In this part, I really don't know how much it could go far, because it will be something that it will be expanding our knowledge worldwide, and it would be something incrementally powerful. But now I turn to my part as a philosopher that I would say, this is very, very, very much interesting, but how can we know that this model is reasoning with the patterns that we do as human beings? Is there any type of human creativity involved in this? And how so? How does it explain how it works? Because we know by science as a methodology of doing this, but models, of course, are built by scientists. But in the end, we don't really know what they're thinking, because in the process of their reasoning, we don't know what's going on. And I really understand that if you really want to, I mean, it goes even broader than just having a prompt in ChatGPT to generate a new image of something that doesn't exist. It's really more about how can we trust that this is going to the same purpose and exactly the same logical that we want to use.
That's actually connecting to my next question. So I just quickly want to introduce that thought, because you're going exactly where I was going next, which is there are so many instances of language models behaving oddly, right? Such as one of these models tried to convince a journalist to break up with his wife. A lot of And I think exactly what you were saying is where I was going to go next, which is a lot of the times researchers are saying they do not know why it was behaving such a way, right? So is this something that you worry about? Is you worrying that the technology of the future might operate in ways that are not fully understood by humans, the same humans who have created the models, right? What do you think about that? I think you were kind of going to expand your vision on that.
Yes, one of the biggest argument for that actually is a really very good expression that I like, which is human in the loop. We are talking about having these transformative models and ideas that how we can automate a lot of stuff and get automatic insights on stuff. But in the end, you have to have a human inside of all this process. In these AI models, you can already explain a lot of how they make predictions and how they use information. It is possible already to do that. But we can't have for now 100% certainty of, especially of even more complex challenges. That's why when we ask a model to do something or give us an answer, it's also very important that we analyze this answer and have someone that can reason on how the particularities of this answer. Because, for example, if you ask ChatGPT to give you an essay about a specific subject and you say, please give me citations of some authors that do this, many times it starts to hallucinate and generate citations that really don't exist. And you might think, okay, well, then why does the model do that? I just specifically told them to give citations, but why did he do that? Because essentially, when he's learning about this whole big bunch of data, it does tasks on the flow of process, and he writes a sentence and about the subject, and then he knows has to put some kind of reference, and then in the event that it does not scope all the information to have that sentence, he knows he's compelled to put up a reference. So in the trade-off between should I make a citation because it's my directive, or should not I do it to be certain, but then I am not complying with my directive. So in the end, most generic ones will have tendency to always comply to the directive. And he prefers to make a citation of not making a citation, even if the citation is wrong, because he was compelled to do it. The same way you were asking about the question about the giving information about someone to make some type of decision. If you ask in a prompt that I have this situation, these are the pros, these are the cons, I want to decide. If you open, like, rarely write a very broad answer, the model can go in so many directions. It can go to a very conservative one or a very, very liberal one without you even knowing if you give it just a wide scope, because it will depend a lot of things on the data that it has, on the probability of choosing some type of answer. In the end, it also is about probabilities of choosing paths. So that's why when we ask for a question and we require some information, the most important thing that we can do are at the beginning and at the end of the process of the generative AI, which is asking the question, very specifically saying that, okay, I want you to cite things, but it needs to be real things. Don't do these type of things. And of course, we as users do not have time to write all the probabilities and all the things that we don't want. So since we are not doing that, it's very important that in the end of the process, you read out everything and you reason with it, saying, does this make sense? Would someone write something like this? Is it something that the person normally would reason with? These are the things that we need to do, but they require time, which is something that a lot of people don't have when they want to use these type of tools. Hence why it's very interesting and very powerful to have this type of education when you have this type of tools.
Exactly. I think you just said the word that was on my mind. Education is going to be definitely very important in this process because people need to understand how to use it and how to interpret it. Um, so going to the next point, as I understand, you have studied misinformation and fake science. So I was wondering, how do you think we'll tackle the challenges from hyper-realistic AI videos, for instance? I feel like all of this is happening so fast and that soon we might not have the resources to tell what's real and what's not real anymore. So is this something you're looking into? What's your view on this moment that's already here, really? It's already happening, right? Do we have the tools? Are you developing the tools? What can you tell me about it?
Yeah, so essentially, my main focus of interest was how do scientists or experts choose the correct type of information, or how they can be misled about some type of science information. Because in my goal was, okay, what if I use studied concerns about history of science that something like this already happened that can help us to decide when misinformation also arises in the future. That essentially was my goal of my P on one of the research projects I want. And what I've learned is that although this type of movements, they are not arbitrary, they can be reasonable with, and they can be something that it can happen even if you have the necessary tools to counterfeit these things. For example, I studied a case where there was two methods of detecting fake wine samples or adulterated wine samples, and there was one scientist that was very, very, very deemed about what he was his model, and he was a very prestigious scientist, so no one dared calling him out and say he was wrong. And there was this lesser known scientist that argued that no, your method is wrong because this and this. In the first term, in the first time, that what happened was the most reputed scientist also got his way because, oh, he's a very important scientist, so he cannot be wrong. But it took some time, even for scientists, to acknowledge that this lesser scientist in the 19th century actually had more important proof that disproved the theory of the older model. And this type of reasoning of evidence and complexity of scientific information is also something that we need to think about in especially now in our present time, because you have a lot of papers being even right now with so much information, so much data that we can't comprehensively scream down and see if they are right or wrong, that we need to be very much concerned about how the methods are developed and how they are brought into like a research paper or an idea, because it's more important now than ever that when you read some kind of output, you reason how, okay, what were the key goals, what were the methodologies used, what were things that were need to be done, because nowadays we privilege so much thing about time and space that we skim down a lot of things and we make them much easier and much faster to read. And if AI is capable already to do a lot of bunch of stuff, because it can, if you can give a lot of type of specific information about it, that's when you really have to analyze and see if this can pass as true or false. In the end, as I did in my models for predicting this type of historical case, I found out that how scientists communicate and how fast they communicate between them is actually very, very key to prove or disprove false information. Because if you can have a very compact network of scientists and they connect and they spread out their information so fast, they can sedimentate this idea of that is already common knowledge despite not having enough evidence that there is some kind of other model that can even explain that even better. And then it makes it so much more difficult for the most accurate method to be introduced in that community. So it's something that, of course, I was saying in a previous question that This is very interesting in terms when you think about what this is has already happened in the past. So you can actually model and think about how you can discern and see how some kind of the same action can happen now in our present time.
Interesting. So here's the big question for you that I don't know if you can help me with that, but it's something I often think about. How should governments prepare for the AI revolution? Do you think governments are ready for what is coming their way?
And the short answer would be that no one's ready for what's coming here. But I would say that now we are more aware of what it can do and what it can't do. And of course, that, for example, I take AI can be a very leveraged tool that it can empower some smaller countries to at least have a more brighter, more clear organization and more driving towards their specific goals. In my case here in Portugal, we tend to have a lot of bureaucracy involved with all different things that are connected with government and social issues. And sometimes we don't have the technological apparatus to, make some type of innovation or delve into more specific industrial things because we have limited resources. Of course, AI is not going to solve all our problems, but it will help a lot in giving us some answers towards the direction that we want to be in. And talk, for example, this is very endearing to me in the social issues part, because imagine that you want to analyze some type of situation and identify some key pockets of people that are really need for some type of assistance or some type of measure that you need to be used, but you cannot identify them because there is so much bureaucracy around and there are not many indicators that you can do. If a government like this has all this type of information, it can have some type of cross-referencing that it can really identify the challenges it need to address, and also create opportunities to say, oh, I really have this type of issue that I couldn't see as a decision maker, but this tool already flagged this type of things that we can do. Also in research and development, because one of the things that teachers say that, we should not use this type of generative tools to create text because it will create more lousy students, that we are not being driven to make critical thinking. I actually think that can be a very big opportunity here, because if you empower students to use these tools to say, I have this question about this topic, can you explain this, or can you give me that type of information in some way that I can understand? The interaction between the model does not end with you getting the answer. Is then you make more and more questions as you go on. For example, I learned about this historic fact. It happened like this thing, and this happened. Oh, interesting. But then what happened? What was the thing that was correlating between this specific situation? As you develop an interesting thing about students that want to be more and more empowered with this type of information, you can highlight some type of curiosity among them. And I think it's something that governments should look into, because it will not only empower students, but also give some type of tools for those type of locations and pockets of people that are less fortunate and have access to a lot about infrastructure, and then can empower them to this type of information. Of course, there's no silver bullet to this, but it's something that there are many areas that governments should already be trying to embrace this, and not seeing as it's going to solve all your problems, but it can give you a lot of answers.
I like how you ended your answer, because it kind of takes me to my next question, which is, so far all of the questions for this interview were created by me. No AI assistance, right? And this is an exercise that I try to do often, to first think by myself before I ask for AI's assistance, right? So however, I did want to know what AI would suggest me to ask you. So I did put your website, which, by the way, for all of our listeners, it's jfcaetano.com. So I did put your website on ChatGPT, and I asked it, to suggest a few questions, right? The first thing that caught my attention was that it showed me a picture of another man as if he were you, right? And that was very surprising to me because you do have your picture up on your website, which I had shared it with, right? So that was a bit, shocking. It did also give me a set of questions broken down by theme, but they were all quite generic and I didn't find them that interesting, to be honest. But here's the one question from the AI that I thought was a little more interesting, and also one of the questions that I had not come up with on my own, right? And it is, as a Fulbright scholar and a science communicator, what strategies do you find most effective in engaging the public with complex scientific topics?
Oh, that is very interesting. And now I'm kind of a bit of scared that ChatGPT is generating huge images of myself, but I'll address that later on.
That was definitely another man, though. I think that was definitely some other José Caetano that they found on another page. But yeah, I can share it with you later.
Yeah, now I'm gonna do that myself. I really know I'm really curious. But regarding to the model's question, I would say that it's not an easy answer to say how you can. How was it? How as I could see the model as
How do you basically it's saying, what strategies are you using to communicate effectively about complex scientific topics to the general public?
I think it was Feynman that said if you can't explain something very simply, then you don't understand it at all. And I think its value, this is pretty much applies to pretty much all type of scientific discovery. There is the one contest in my university, which I find it very interesting, which is the 3-minute thesis, where PhD students have to explain all their projects in just 3 minutes. And I thought of applying, but I couldn't because I would leave much more than 3 minutes. I couldn't condense a lot in 3 minutes. But also realized to me that I have an issue to address because I cannot make a contribution to society if I cannot show them, at least a big amount of people, that this matters in somehow, some way to the advancement of technology in our society. And I think there is no easy answer to this because, of course, it should be very much difficult to explain quantum mechanics or animal biology, for example. But I would say that the best way if you want to communicate these type of issues is that you can relate the goals that you want to have in your research with how it may impact people's lives. For example, what I use in my PhD project is that I want to generate specific molecules for one specific type of reaction that, of course, many people don't realize what it is. But I don't explain it like that. What I say is that, I want to design a molecule that will make reactions faster.
I just want to quickly intervene because that was my last question for you, which is exactly that. What is your main research topic? Because I understand the focus is on chemical processes and AI, right? So my question was, is there a way on which you can explain this to the average person? And I do want to share that my worst subject at school was chemistry. I still have nightmares about failing it, which I didn't, but that was kind of a miracle. So is there any way that you can explain what you're doing to a person like me? And I like what you said about it's all about, how can that be used, I think, right, in our daily lives. So just in a nutshell, or in the 3 minutes that the PhD students had. But basically, what are you researching and what's the end goal that you have with it?
Okay, so in a nutshell, what I'm aiming to do is that there is a very specific important type of reaction, which are epoxidation reactions, which produce a very specific type of chemical component, which is very, very important to producing fine drugs, other types of pharmaceuticals, even some other type of industrialized chemicals. It's very important. It's pretty much used to produce it. You have to use a lot of raw materials and you have to use a lot of energy. So it's not a very sustainable process. So there is a longer discussion in chemistry that how can we make this process more sustainable? And one of the actions is, we can use a catalyst which can speed up this reaction and give it even more yield as we use less energy. But creating catalysts is very difficult because, as I said before, you have to go to the lab, try one by one, and then do a bunch of experiments, and that takes time. But since epoxides are one of the biggest chemical commodities in terms of market value, what about we could use AI to generate a perfect catalyst for this reaction? So we could use less raw materials, less energy to produce the same chemical compound that we want. So essentially, that is my project. I have to build from scratch an AI model that will have to learn from not all, but a big library of the same type of reactions, so it could learn the chemistry behind those reactions. And then I could ask the model, okay, now that you already know what are epoxidation reactions involving this specific type of catalyst, please now give me a molecule that would satisfy my criteria to give a new molecule. And that's essentially what I'm using the model.
I think that was great. I totally understood that. So I think our listeners as well will have gotten that. That makes a lot of sense that you would try to find ways to use less raw material, less energy, and everything else and make processes more sustainable. So that was a really good summary, I think. I do want to share with everybody that José is working on a special AI issue for the Fulbright Chronicles that will be coming out, in the next month. So keep an eye out for that. You can also connect with him on Fulbrighter. And thank you very much, José, for taking the time to talk to us. I wish you the very best with your research. Your work is very inspiring. I think it's really interesting to see people who are connecting science to philosophy. And I think it's important to have people thinking in a broader way now that we have this, gigantic technology that is coming our way. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us, for sharing a little bit about your knowledge. And is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners before we go?
Yeah, I just before thanking you for this again for this opportunity, I will just like to reinforce the idea about if you haven't visited, you're curious about how you can engage with Fulbright and Fulbrighters around the world. Please visit our new journal Fulbright Chronicles, where we have very interesting pieces about Fulbrighters all around the world, and their texts are not academic tests of how they gauge that specific type of knowledge, but how did their Fulbright experience enrich them in a way that they could achieve their goals. And I think that if you are very curious about this movement, this project, or even if you already were a Fulbrighter, you want to see how different perspectives about the same type of adventure that you had as a Fulbrighter, please log on. We have very interesting stories. And as you said, we have an upcoming issue on AI related to education and social sciences, where we are going to have very interesting pieces about Fulbrighters that some of them come to the US or already applied things that they learn in the US into their own countries. So I think it would be a very interesting issue for people that are more curious about how they can deal with AI in their everyday lives. And essentially, yeah, that was it. I would like to people to have that. And of course, I want to thank you, Gabriele, for having me this opportunity. And I wish you all the best also for the project. And I hope you have a very good success. And hopefully I can contribute more if you desire it. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And on that note, I also want to remind everybody that this issue of the Pulse podcast is powered by Fulbrighter. That's the network and the app where you can connect with other Fulbrighters. You can also connect with José there. And we'll definitely let you know on Fulbrighter when the next issue of the Chronicles is out. So that's another reason for you to sign up. So thank you so much, José. Have a great, wonderful week. And I'll see you all next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.